7 out of 10 people are being left behind when I first say that. It sounds like a political line. It is not, it is a financial reality. 7 out of 10 people in America are living paycheck to paycheck. Stop and really see that. Drive past 10 houses, walk down 1 block, sit in 1 office, stand in 1 grocery line, and statistically most of the people you see are working, trying, paying bills, doing their best, and still living with the feeling that if the next paycheck is interrupted, the whole machine of life begins to shake. That is not a side issue. That is the issue. Because when a society reaches that point, people do not simply have less money, they have less room to think, less room to plan, less room to dream, less room to recover. And once room disappears, everything gets harder. The reference document opens with this exact emotional and statistical punch. 7 out of 10 people are living paycheck to paycheck. Many feel left behind, and the speaker's central promise is to restore hope while teaching a plan. It also frames the core split clearly. Some people are buried in debt and fear. Some are doing a few things right, but still doubt whether they are truly on track, and some are starting over after divorce, widowhood, or financial disruption. I have spent enough of my life around money to know something simple. People do not need more shame. They need a plan. Because when a person has no plan for money, he is not living without a plan. He is living inside somebody else's plan. That is one of the most important truths in the entire modern economy. Either you have a plan for your money or someone else has a plan for your money. And if you think that sentence sounds dramatic, look down at the phone in your hand. That little machine is either helping you become wealthier or it is helping other people quietly extract your future from you. One automatic payment at a time. The source text says this extremely well. It calls the current environment an automatic economy and argues that the phone is now a money magnet. In one direction, it can automate investing, saving, and planning. In the other direction, it can automate subscriptions, convenience spending, cream and lotion purchases, streaming services, gym charges, card bills, and every other business that wants your lifetime value, not just one transaction. That is the part many people miss. They think the economy is simply expensive. It is expensive, yes. But it is also automated, and automation does not care whether it is helping you or hurting you. It simply amplifies the direction you have already chosen. If your money is automated toward investing ownership and reserves, the machine works for you. If your money is automated toward consumption, recurring leakage, and interest payments, the machine works against you. That is why I say modern wealth is not only about how much you earn, it is about what systems touch your paycheck before you do. Now let me tell you something that young people especially need to hear. We are going into a period of time when more wealth will likely be created than at any other point in recent memory. And the people who participate in that wealth creation will not necessarily be the hardest workers. They will be the owners. The source material makes this case with unusual clarity. It says there are 2 escalators to wealth in America, real estate and stocks, and that the system is effectively built to reward those who own these assets, tax law, incentives, and opportunity tilt toward investors. If you are not an investor, the text argues, you are being left behind faster than ever. I think that is true enough that it should make people uncomfortable, because most people are still trying to solve the wealth problem only through labor. Work more hours, take another shift, push harder, maybe ask for a raise. All of that may be necessary. But if labor is your only engine, you are climbing stairs while other people are standing on escalators. That is the difference. And I do not say that to discourage people. I say it because once you understand the game, the solution becomes more obvious. You must own pieces of businesses, own productive assets, own systems that can grow while you sleep. That is what the rich understand even when they cannot explain it elegantly. And thanks to technology, the door to ownership is no longer locked the way it once was. The reference document is right about that too. It points out that young people today can begin investing tiny amounts, even spare change, through technology in a way that was difficult decades ago. The democratization of access means the barrier to starting is lower than it used to be, even if the barrier to getting serious still requires discipline. But access is not the same thing as action. That is where the next problem begins. Most people are not living with a real financial plan. They are living with what the source text calls the no plan plan. I like that phrase because it is brutally accurate. The no plan plan works like this. The paycheck comes in, the bills go out, a few subscriptions are attached, a few comforts are attached, a few emergencies arrive, a few unnecessary expenses slip in because life is tiring, and then at the end of the month the person tells himself that next month he will get organized. That is not a plan, that is drift. And drift is one of the costliest forces in finance, because drift never looks like a crisis in the beginning. It just looks like normal life, until one day the person wakes up and realizes years have passed and the future is still unfunded. That is why I believe in paying yourself first. Not because it sounds clever, because it is one of the few ways to beat drift before drift beats you. The source document repeatedly returns to this principle. It says that the first hour a day of income should go to your future automatically, before the rest of your life gets a chance to spend it. It frames this as the core of an automatic millionaire plan and contrasts it with the plan most people are unconsciously living. That phrase, the first hour a day of your income, is one of the strongest ideas in the whole file. People hear 12 or 14% of gross income and panic. They say they cannot do it. Then they hear it explained another way, that the first hour a day of an 8-hour workday belongs to their future, and suddenly the idea becomes human. That is because ideas change once they become concrete. And the math behind it matters. The source document points to fidelity data showing large numbers of 401k millionaires, with averages around age 59 and meaningful savings rates combined with employer matching. It uses this to make a broader point. Ordinary people do become wealthy through consistent automatic contributions over long periods of time, not through brilliance, through behavior. I have always trusted behavior more than brilliance. Brilliance is uneven. Behavior compounds. That is why I would rather have an ordinary investor who saves consistently for 26 years than a clever investor who reads constantly, debates markets, and starts and stops according to his emotions. Now, let us address the objection, honestly. What if you are living paycheck to paycheck? What if 12% feels absurd? What if you hear this and think, that may be fine for people with room, but I do not have room? The answer is not to give up on the principle. The answer is to begin where reality allows and build. The source file is wise here too. It says if you cannot begin with 12%, begin with 1%. Let the system start, let the habit exist, then move it upward gradually, even 1% at a time. The key is not that everyone begins in the same place. The key is that the process becomes automatic and directional. That is profoundly important because a person who starts at 1% and builds is on a completely different path from the person who waits for perfect conditions to begin. No one becomes financially free by waiting until freedom feels easy to fund. You begin before you feel ready. Then you adjust. That is another powerful truth from the file. If an employer cut your income by 10% tomorrow, but kept your job secure, many people would find a way to adjust, yet they resist the idea of voluntarily redirecting that same portion to their own future. Why? Because people are willing to adjust reactively. They are much more resistant to adjusting proactively. And yet proactive adjustment is the very thing that buys freedom. That is why I say wealth is not only a math game, it is a behavioral game. Now, when someone does not have a 401k, the principle does not disappear. The vehicle simply changes. The source material explains this clearly through the Roth IRA example. If you do not have an employer plan, you can still set up an account, automate transfers from checking after each paycheck, and treat your future like a real bill that must be paid. It also introduces a broader framework beyond retirement alone, a retirement account, an emergency account, and a dream account. I like that framework very much because human beings do not live for retirement alone. They need security now, and they need hope now. That is why I think every serious money plan should eventually have 3 destinations. The future, the emergency, the dream. The future account is for the person you will become decades from. Now the emergency account is for protecting today from becoming chaos tomorrow, and the dream account is for the things that make life feel meaningful between now and old age. This is one of the most adult distinctions in the whole conversation. Retirement money is not emergency money. Emergency money is not vacation money. Vacation money is not house money. When people mix all these categories together, every goal becomes fragile, and fragile plans collapse under ordinary life. The source file recommends a money market account or similarly liquid vehicle for emergency savings, specifically because the account should be safe and accessible rather than treated like a growth engine. It also discusses using separate buckets for shorter-term dreams and longer-term goals depending on the timeline. That is how real financial architecture works. Different jobs, different buckets, different time horizons. Most people do not fail because they are incapable. They fail because everything is in one emotional pile, one checking account, one credit card, one wave of stress, one pile of receipts, one vague sense that something needs to improve that is not architecture, that is exposure, and exposure becomes expensive quickly when debt enters the picture. Now let us speak honestly about debt. There are few feelings in the world uglier than looking at bills you do not want to open. The source text tells a brutally human story here. It describes opening credit card bills while covering the eyes, feeling the room spin, and not even remembering what the money was spent on. It also says something equally important. People often get out of debt and then fall back into it because debt is not only a balance problem, it is a habit problem. That is exactly right. Debt is rarely only math. It is a pattern. It is spending money you do not have on things you do not need in order to solve an emotional problem that money cannot actually solve. That pattern must be broken or the debt will return wearing different clothes. I respect the source document S-DOPE system because it is simple and behavioral, done on last payment. Take out the cards, print the statements, write down the balances, the rates, the minimum payments, and the timelines. Then attack the smallest balances first to reduce the number of cards and create visible wins. That is not purely mathematical. It is psychological warfare against overwhelm. And overwhelm is what keeps many people trapped. I do not care very much whether a debt plan sounds elegant. I care whether it survives contact with a human being. The best debt strategy is the one that the person can actually continue through shame, boredom, frustration, and fatigue. That is why I also like another point buried in the broader set of uploaded materials. Negotiate the APR, automate the minimums to avoid late fees, and get organized enough that the banks stop profiting from your chaos. That sentence alone is worth remembering. Do not let the banks profit from your chaos. Now let us talk about another part of the reference document that I think is explosive in the best sense. $10,000. The source file says that when people are asked how much money would change their lives, the most common answer is not $1 million. It is $10,000. Why? Because for many people, $10,000 buys breathing room. It buys the ability to leave a job. It buys the ability to leave a relationship. It buys the ability to stop drowning. Then the file gives the next move. $10,000 is only $27.40 a day, and if that same amount were invested daily over long periods at strong market returns, it becomes a fortune. That is one of the strongest hooks in the whole document, and it deserves to be said again. The number that changes a life is often much smaller than people imagine. But the habits that produce that number are also much more available than people admit. $27.40 a day is nothing. $27.40 a day is everything. It depends entirely on whether that money is being consumed or compounded. That is the whole war. And yes, the source text is right to say that today, economy is built around convenience, and convenience is often where the daily money disappears. Delivered food, ride shares, hidden subscriptions, small emotional purchases. Convenience becomes the tax people pay for being tired, and tired people are exactly the people most vulnerable to paycheck living. So if I were trying to wake someone up, I would say this: stop waiting for one giant breakthrough. Look for the daily leaks, because daily leaks become annual bondage, and daily redirects become future freedom. That is why I also like the 100-day savings challenge in the reference material. Save $10 a day for 100 days. Not because $10 a day makes you rich instantly, but because it reintroduces a person to the experience of proving to himself that he can direct money instead of merely reacting to money. That proof matters. People who feel hopeless often do not need a lecture first. They need evidence. Evidence that change is possible, evidence that the process works, evidence that they can create a small win, and once the small win appears, hope returns. That is another line from the file I deeply agree with. You do not have to be fully out of debt to feel better. You start feeling better when you start taking control. That is one of the most compassionate truths in personal finance, because the human nervous system does not wait for the finish line to respond. It responds to agency. The moment a person goes from drift to direction, the burden changes. The reference text says this explicitly, and it is correct. The process of digging out already changes how you feel, because the shame of avoiding the issue begins to be replaced by the energy of working the issue. Now let us talk about compounding more directly, because without compounding, most people will never understand why all of this matters so much. Compounding is not exciting in the beginning. That is why people ignore it. In the beginning, it looks insultingly small. A few dollars here, a few hundred there, a contribution that does not seem large enough to matter. And that is where many people fail the test. They confuse invisible progress with absent progress. The reference material is right to call compound interest the eighth wonder of the world. More importantly, it uses a simple concrete example, $27.40 a day, to show how a quantity that feels survivable in the present becomes extraordinary over decades. That is the correct way to teach compounding, not as theory, as a trade between present spending and future force. That is why I tell young people not to get cute with investing. Do not chase meme stocks. Do not gamble with crypto stories, because social media made speculation sound like intelligence. Do not confuse risk with sophistication. The source document says this clearly too. Young people are often told that youth is the time to take risk, and they interpret that to mean reckless speculation. Then they save, lose, and conclude the game is rigged. The wiser move, according to the file, is diversified low-cost exposure through index funds or target date funds. I agree completely. Youth is the time to take advantage of time. That is not the same thing as taking silly risk. Time is already enough of an advantage. You do not need recklessness on top of it. The source file is especially practical here, recommending target date funds for most ordinary 401k savers and broad index exposure, like the total stock market approach for simplicity, diversification, and low cost. It also warns that rollover mistakes, such as leaving assets in cash or allowing contribution rates to reset lower at a new employer, can quietly cost people hundreds of thousands over a working lifetime. That is the kind of operational detail that separates good intentions from real outcomes. That point alone should sober people. It is not enough to start. You must protect the system after starting rollover correctly. Reinvest correctly. Reset your savings rate upward again. If a new employer defaults you lower, make sure the money is invested, not left idle. This is why I say money rewards attention, not constant anxiety attention. Now, some people listening are not in their 20s. They are in their 40s, their 50s, their 60s, maybe divorced. Maybe widowed, maybe starting over, maybe humiliated by how late they feel. The reference document is compassionate and firm here too. It says it is never too late unless you give up. It also gives a practical story of a woman starting later in life and still being able to build meaningful assets by beginning with a realistic daily savings habit. The message is not that late is ideal. The message is that late is still alive. I believe that deeply. Late is not ideal. Late is still alive. That is a sentence worth remembering. If you are in your 50s, you still have a tremendous amount of economic life left if you are willing to act with seriousness. The kids may be older, income may be higher than it was decades ago. Time is shorter, yes, but contribution power may be stronger, and contribution power plus discipline plus compounding is still a very meaningful formula. The wrong response to being late is despair. The right response is urgency without panic. Now, I want to say something about marriage, widowhood, and financial adulthood, because the file goes there and it is important. Money is not just an individual skill, it is also a household skill. And too many households are built on one person knowing everything and the other knowing almost nothing. That is not love. That is exposure. The reference document is direct about this. It says the average age of widowhood is 59, that many women are financially devastated in widowhood or divorce because they were not fully involved in the money, and that every adult needs to know where the accounts are, what the passwords are, whether there is a will, where the insurance policies are, and what the real financial structure looks like. It even warns that if you do not know where the money is before divorce or death, you are at a huge disadvantage. That may sound dark. It is simply real. I have always thought mature love includes financial transparency, not because romance should become accounting, because life is fragile. And fragility does not ask permission before arriving. A money date, as the source text calls it, is not unromantic. It is responsible. Sit down together, review the accounts, review the debts, review the plan, review the dreams, review the documents. Do this before crisis, not after. Because after crisis, people are grieving, confused, tired, and often in no condition to build clarity from scratch. The File S section on file folders, wills, passwords. Old accounts and estate confusion may feel mundane, but it is exactly the kind of mundane work that prevents life from becoming chaos at the worst possible moment. That is another overlooked truth about money. Good systems are acts of love. Now, if I had to reduce the entire reference document to one core principle, it would be this: use money as a tool to free yourself. Not impress people, not perform adulthood, not maintain subscriptions to old identities. Free yourself. Free yourself from paycheck panic. Free yourself from high-interest debt. Free yourself from the no-plan plan. Free yourself from the fantasy that labor alone will save you. Free yourself from the ignorance of not knowing where the accounts are. Free yourself from being a consumer only in a system that rewards owners. And how do you do that? You automate, you own, you save, you invest, you reduce traps. You make the plan real enough that the phone in your hand starts working for your future instead of against it. That is the whole thing. Now let me give you the version I would want a person to hear if he were sitting across from me. Scared and tired and hoping this is not too late, start somewhere. Today, not after you feel less embarrassed, not after the perfect job, not after the debt is magically smaller, not after a calmer month. Today, if you have a 401k, set a contribution. If it is 1%, fine. If it is 12%, even better. If you do not have a 401k, open the Roth IRA Automate from checking. Set up the emergency account, name the dream account, list the debts, cut the traps, stop taking store cards, stop paying interest for status, stop leaving old subscriptions attached to your future. And if all you can do today is $10, do $10. Because $10 automated is better than $1,000 promised to yourself someday. That is how people get free, not in one heroic day. In years of deliberate automation, the source text is right about that too. You do not get rich in days, you get rich in decades, and you do not get out of debt in days either. But once the system starts, the person starts to feel better because hope has been given a mechanism, not just a slogan. That is what I would leave you with. Hope is not a feeling. Hope is a plan. And once the plan becomes automatic, your future finally has a chance to outrun your past.